Hello, everyone, and hopefully we'll have some overlap between the first two parts. But if not, we'll make sure and get through everything. And I'm really glad to see people able to come to this accessibility talk. And I'm going to share my screen. So we're going to be talking about a stylish yet accessible syllabus in Canvas. Um, so this was originally conceived as a 1-hour talk. So we talked a lot about Canvas and Word. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Canvas, but a lot about Word, and that's because a lot of faculty are still using Word to create their syllabi, and either option works, and we're trying to make sure people can make accessible content but still have freedom to make it look the way they want it to. So why the syllabus? So a lot of online courses, people have been introduced to the concept of accessibility, but it's still not exactly something people are always familiar with across the campus. So we're thinking of ways to help people become more familiar with it. And one thought is the syllabus. It is one document, but it's the first document many students see. And it actually, if you are able to make an accessible syllabus, that means you've added headings, semantic headings, inserted usable link text probably, likely created accessible tables because a lot of people use tables for their schedule or their grading scale. Perhaps you've learned to insert it, you're using a logo or a photo or some other image, and maybe this will give you a chance to insert alt text. And we'll also talk a little bit about color contrast. Um, so in the last session, someone asked if a student can't perceive color, but we're used to using color to point out emphasis. One tip is to add something like an underline. This came from a student I was working with. I would also add, if it's really, really important, you might want to start adding things like asterisks or really, really important. So even if you can't see the document, you still know how important it is. So the accessibility options we'll be talking about will address users with severe visual disability. So these are people who don't have usable vision, but they use a screen reader like JAWS to read everything out. And JAWS doesn't just read out text, they'll read out location of tables, location of images, location of headings, and also image alt text. Low vision, we talk about brightness, darkness contrast between the text and the background. And this is also important for students with color deficient vision, and also cognitive differences. So making sure you use consistent navigation, consistent formatting. And also images actually are often a good thing for this audience. So we never discourage use of images or icons. We just want to make sure they have the right alt text. So one of the things, one of the easiest things to fix is usable link text. And so according to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the purpose of the link can be determined from the link text alone. And one reason we recommend that is because someone on a screen reader, if they go to a new website such as CNN or a news site, they might pull up a list of links. And so if the list of links includes things like Jim Thatcher quality text links or WebAIM, they know they're going to a different website. But if the link just says here, here, or click here, or read more, it's more confusing. And even this was a recent website that has been fixed, for the record. But as you can see, if you are just looking at the links and you're wondering what this website is about and where it's taking you from, they all said read. And this was actually an important website. As you see from this page, it was actually about coronavirus updates and what Penn State is doing in the response and frequently asked questions. So even as a sighted user, highlighting those content pieces as links was much more usable and accessible. And just, I've looked at syllabus documents in the past few years, and so I would caution people about here, read more, learn more as repetitive link text, or even readings. If you're having readings for every week and a list of links are read out, it would just be a list of reading links. But if they say readings week 1 or week 1 readings, there'll be some distinctions, so that's more usable. URL links, and I'm bringing this up because a lot of tools like PowerPoint and Word do turn URLs into links, and so a lot of people, including myself, will just type in the URL and presto, it's a link. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you think about reading it out, it's one thing to read out www.psu.edu, people will understand that, but this next one, www.psu.edu/about/library/arts-and-music-and-media center. That's kind of a mouthful, so that might be too long. So in either Canvas or Word, when you insert a link in Canvas, you would type in text and then insert the link. Or in Word, not everyone using Word may realize this, but if you highlight a text or a phrase and then go to the hyperlink editor, then you can type in the address, but the text it will display is Music and Media Center from the libraries. And I know this either Command K on the Mac or Control K will access this. I believe it's also in the References tab. And these are the instructions. So it's actually on the Insert tab. And then there's a link option. So next I'm going to talk about headings. So headings, people intuitively insert headings into long documents, including the syllabus or a home page. So this is a web page, and I used a scanning tool called Wave, which you can use outside of Canvas. It's another accessibility tool. And here, the student's menu is identified as a heading level 3. The title of the document, Meet with an Education Abroad Advisor, is identified as an H1. Office hours are H2, and scheduled and walk-ins are H3. So a student wanting to meet with an education abroad advisor, and we do have students with visual disabilities from outside the US, so they do need this information. They can go to this page and they want to figure out what are the walk-in hours. They can jump to that heading. And the way they do that again is they pull up a list of headings. And this is from the accessibility homepage. And so they know if I want news and events, I can jump there, or policies and procedures, that is also another heading, and they can jump to that page. And as was previously mentioned, screen readers only identify headings as sections of a page. They just don't by default distinguish boldface, italics, color text, or small text. A person can change the settings, so if they know in a course that, for instance, they need to be aware of bold versus italics or small text versus capitals, they can do that, but it's not an everything day. That's why we often recommend using semantic headers and table headers to help do the navigation. And table headers usually is a marking you apply to the first row of a table to identify which columns are in the table. Semantic headings, depending on which document type you're using, will be a little different. So if you're coding raw HTML and you're familiar with H1, H2, H6 tags, or the lowercase version, those are the original heading tags actually. If you're using the Canvas rich text editor, and you want larger text, we often recommend using styles header 2 through header 6. There is no header 1 because the title field is actually generating an H1 tag for you. And in Word, the styles heading 1 through heading 6 perform the same function. So here's the heading option in Canvas. In Canvas, they're calling it header, but it's really a heading. And I would also say, for example, maybe you want the heading, you don't want it to be gray, you want it to be another color. As long as it's a header 2, you can use the other formatting tools such as italics or changing colors to add additional formatting on top of that, but still keep the heading structure. In Word, the Styles panel, which is on the Home tab, usually includes headings. Now, this is the typical heading 1 style, the heading 2 style, and the heading 4 style. However, again, based on what I've seen from different syllabi I've looked at, not a lot of people really like how the blue text appears in the document. So if we say, please use a heading 1, people may say, but that's ugly, so they change it to something else. However, the nice thing about Word is if you understand styles, you don't have to manually format all your headings. Instead, what you can do is change what your headings look like to what you want them to look like. So this is sort of the default Microsoft template. And actually, if you used it with a sans serif font instead of New York Times, it would probably look okay, but it may not be what you want. I actually prefer Calibri, and I made my heading larger and bigger, and I even can make it centered if that's what I want. That would be the title of my document. Heading 2 is also fairly large and bold. Heading 3 is a little smaller, and then heading 4 is the same size as the main text. 5 and 6 are colored. I don't necessarily recommend using colored. They're used in my template for debugging reasons. You'll also notice that here the normal style. Normal is the default formatting that your Word file uses. In a lot of cases, it's New York Times 12 point, which a lot of people do like. I have it set to Calibri, which is a sans serif font. This is an alternative set of headings. So a lot of faculty that I've seen for various reasons really like Times New Roman. It's very simple and basic, and I mean that in a nice way. Hopefully it's gotten to have a bad meaning, but it's plain and simple, it's straight to the point. And if that's what a person wants, then we can make the heading structure work that way. And so at this point, I'm going to turn to a styles demo to sort of show you how you can sort of take control of your syllabus. So this is based on a hands-on seminar I've done in the past. So this is an example of a document I created that has some accessibility issues, but hopefully we can fix them. So one of them is I did not want to use the heading 1 style, which is still this blue text. So instead I used Georgia and I made it italicized and larger. But unfortunately, from a screen reader perspective, that doesn't mean anything. In comparison, this document, it looks a little different, but you'll see I also did not use the blue heading styles. Instead, it's this is the Palatino font, and it's centered. And this is still Palatino because I really like Palatino, but boldface and larger. But how do I know these are headings? Well, there are 2 ways. I can look in the styles pane, and these are the revised headings. But also, and I just found this tool recently, if you open up the navigation pane on the right, there's the thumbnails view, but then there's this document map, and anything that's a heading is in this document map, and that mimics what a screen reader is going to read when they pull up the headings. In comparison, this document, if I pull up the map, there's no headings at all. So a student getting this syllabus would have to read through the whole thing and they wouldn't be able to jump to the schedule or the disability access information or the meeting times. So how did I redefine the head styles? There are two ways. One is I can, if you go to the format tools or the home, you can modify a header. So I'm just going to go to styles since I'm on a Mac, and I can modify which font I'm using, the size I'm using. If I want to make it italics, I can do that. If I want to use a different color, maybe I want to do a dark blue because I did like that. I can change formats of paragraphs, and there's spacing before and after. Even for my normal paragraphs, I usually set a little bit of spacing afterwards so that I don't have to insert an empty paragraph between between each time I create a new paragraph. I can just hit enter, there'll be a little gap there. And that's more efficient and accessible. And also you can change tabs. This border, I think, yeah, this is where if you have inserted a text box with different colors, the text box unfortunately is not always accessible. It's like this weird force field that a screen reader can't get through. But if you add shading and borders around a paragraph, you can make it look like a colored text box. So that's really nice to know. And so if you're teaching a foreign language and you've been asked to do language tagging, it's sometimes nice to set a format for a particular foreign language so you can check whether it's been tagged or not. I can explain that later offline. And shortcut key, this is nice if you know there are default shortcut keys for the main heading styles, but if you want another style, again, maybe for the foreign language, you can define a shortcut key to control that style. And that also really speeds up creating a document because I can hit a keyboard shortcut key to create a style. That's one way to do it. Another way is I'm going to go down here. So one thing I didn't talk about yet is one thing you really want to avoid in tables is merging cells if at all possible. But you can use border and shading tricks to make it look like a merged cell when it's really not. This is in fact a heading 4 style. And I have this version of it, I've made dark blue background and white text so there's sufficient contrast. And it sort of looks like a mini tab, whereas in an earlier version of the syllabus, there it is. This is an example of a merged table cell where you should really take this out and put it above. And this is where all the weeks are merged together, and that's really difficult. Not only for someone on a screen reader, but for a lot of sighted users, that's going to be a complicated object to interpret. So, whoops. I recommend this instead. So what I've done is I've set a border and shading, and I've even set the margin so that it's pulled back in a little. This is also a heading 4. If you look at the style panes, it doesn't look like this yet. It still looks like a more generic version. However, if I go, this is sort of the update headings trick. If I click in here and I click styles on the Mac, and you can do it in here on Windows, I click update 4 to match selection. not only did this change, but anything that was a heading 4 before now gets updated. And this is to let you know that styles were actually designed not for accessibility, but by publishers doing long documents where, for example, maybe they used a particular font, they gave it to an editor or someone to approve, and that person said, I hate this font, I want this other font instead. So, or I don't want this heading to be blue, I want it to be black instead. You can go and change the specification for the one heading and everything batch updates. And that is the head of my headings demo. Except for the last thing I wanted to show was, for example, you do decide, I really didn't want Palatino after all. I wanted Calibri and I really don't like these color things. Or I got this syllabus from an instructor and I just don't like the headings that instructor used. I want to use my own headings instead. That's actually something you can fix. So I'm going to go into the style menu and there's something called organizer. And the organizer lets you transition style specifications between documents. My normal document is my default document. It's set up the way I want it to be set up. So I can copy all these styles over into this syllabus document. And just like that, it's another font. It's back to the plain H4. Not everything is perfect, but that's because I didn't get the normal style correct. So if there's a keyboard command, it's Control Option N on the Mac. Nope. All right, so I probably have to redefine it. So I can change it to Calibri. Or I'll change it to, yeah. And make sure. So now in the styles. And again, now it looks like the way I want it to look. I do not. So I realized that was sort of a quick and dirty demo, and it's sort of more of a proof of concept. We will provide handout. There is a step-by-step handout we're developing, and we're hoping to expand this effort soon to provide more syllabus templates with instructions on how to use them and more tricks of the trade and things like that. But I'm going to get back to PowerPoint. Since we only have 5 minutes left, these are the keyboard commands. These are some screenshots. I think I am going to stop here and see if there are any questions.
We do have a couple questions in the chat that came up in the Q&A, sorry. What about information in the header and the footer in Word? How does a text reader view that information?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, by default, because it's like it's if in another window by default, they're not read out. So please avoid putting a title of the document in the header. There are other ways to save space. Page numbers may not be as much of an issue, but if there's a link in the footer, it might not be read out. Now, the ironic thing was another benefit to creating an accessible Word file is a lot of people actually want it to be PDF. In the more recent versions of Word, if you save as PDF or you export to PDF with that Adobe button, it will create a tagged PDF. So it'll carry over all the headings and image alt text, and it will be usable by a screen reader. In that situation, the headers are read out. So sometimes we're actually getting to the point where sometimes a tagged PDF from Word is a little easier than a Word file, but either are pretty good options.
Okay, and the other question was about the font itself. I always thought New Times Roman was the most accessible font. I prefer Calibri. Can I go ahead and use Calibri and be confident the text will be accessible?
Actually, there are no official font recommendations, but actually Calibri is probably considered more accessible than Times New Roman, ironically. So usually when I'm trying to think, is this font going to be useful? One thing I look at is the lowercase o, and the wider and taller it is, usually the more legible the font. It's also useful to look at things like whether the number one, the capital I, and the lowercase l are distinguished or not. Also, I know lightweight fonts are in fashion, but you might not want to make everything the lightest weight font possible, because that might be, again, there are no official guidelines, but it's going to appear lighter on the text than a normal weight font would. But I like that. I like a lightweight font too. So um, there are no official guidelines. So usually whatever you want to use, and I think most academic people have some pretty good guidelines on what's going to be more legible than another font. Are there any other questions?
That is all I'm seeing in the chat. Oh,
Okay.
in the chat, Wade had a couple comments in there about Comic Sans making a comeback, and he also put in a link to the Wave checker that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll and put it in the slides. I think Comic Sans, so this is going to be controversial. One of the benefits of using a Word version of the syllabus is people are very idiosyncratic in their font preferences. So if you have a student who really feels strongly that they need Comic Sans in order to really help read the content, and there are students with different reading differences who really like Comic Sans, even though a lot of people like me don't. If it's in Word, that the student can change the font also. They can import heading templates um, from their own document. When it's in PDF, it's a little more set in stone. So something to consider. I also getting, there's actually a font called Chalkboard on the Mac. Let's see if I can find it. Actually, it sort of has the same feel, but I tend to prefer it over Comic Sans. There we go.
Looks like another question just came up right before we end here from Donna. Any possibility of providing a document summarizing best practices for developing an accessible syllabus within Canvas?
Yes. So if there are two resources, one is if you go to, we probably should work on this at some point, but more officially, but accessibility.psu.edu/canvas in the rich content editor. If you follow those guidelines, such as heading styles, data tables, and so forth, you will create an accessible syllabus. But it hasn't been extracted yet for as a separate document. But if there are any specific questions about Canvas, I'm happy to answer them. Although I realize we're at 2 o'clock, so.
Yeah, we actually we are at 2 o'clock, but we also cleared the Q&A, so you answered everything that came in. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. We appreciate you presenting on
Thank
the
you.
syllabus for us. So we hope that everybody joins us again next week, and thanks for attending our Canvas Day session.
Thanks.